Good morning, everyone. My name is Dr. Deepa Javeri. I'm a co-founder of the Women Who Win platform, which is a global media platform where we share stories of women all across the world and across different industries, along with two other co-founders, Dr. Manju Sheth and Shalin Sheth. We're so excited to welcome you to a panel on fair investment in collaboration with the Coalition for Capital Equity. We'll also be sharing a recording of this webinar, and the call to action slides will be sent as an attachment to the emails for the people that registered through the Zoom link. We encourage you to forward this to all your friends and colleagues, as this is a really relevant topic to all of us. And with that, I'll hand it over to our moderator, Gitanjali Swami, to introduce herself and our esteemed panelists. Thank you, Geeta.
Thank you, Deepa. So good morning, everyone. And thank you for joining us today for a very exciting and timely panel on capital equity. And I'd like to start by introducing our very distinguished panelists. First, we have Representative Tran Nguyen, who is the Massachusetts State Representative for the 18th District, which includes Andover, Bedford, North Andover, Tewksbury. Representative Nguyen is a lawyer who has advocated for domestic violence survivors, workers, seniors, veterans, and children. And she is a legislator who is engaged in active legislative advocacy, working with statewide coalitions, lawmakers, and lawmaking bodies for laws that address the issues of racial and economic justice and protect the rights of the most vulnerable populations. Welcome, Rep. Nguyen. We also have Karen Gregory, who is an experienced impact and investor and venture capitalist. Karen is co-founder and managing partner of Blue Highway Capital and has over 30 years of business experience as an attorney, executive, and early stage investor. She was previously with Mass Ventures, an early stage socially responsible venture capital fund focused on urban and rural areas in Massachusetts. Welcome, Karen. We have on the other side of the fence as an entrepreneur, Allison Byers, who is a dynamic two-time founder whose current company, Scroobius, connects underrepresented founders and investors through an AI-powered platform. Allison is also an activist who has been working on the California Senate bill, something I'm very excited about because it recently was passed by both the House and the Senate in California and is sitting on the governor's desk. She is also an angel investor, a startup mentor, and co-chair of the All Raise Boston leadership team. Welcome, Allison. We have also representing the broader global perspective on gender diversity and equity, Professor Rangita De Alvis, who is a globally recognized international women's rights expert and was recently elected to the UN Convention on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women, CEDAW. She is also faculty at the University of Pennsylvania Carey Law School, where she is an Associate Dean of International Affairs and teaches international women's rights. Welcome, Rangita. And finally, our last panelist is Rajiv Kapoor, who is the founding partner of Chai Ventures. Chai Ventures is a female-focused venture capital firm that invests in women-led pre-Series A businesses across many industries. And more excitingly, he is also the father of 3 young women. So welcome, Rajiv, and welcome to all the panelists. I'm the moderator. My name is Gitanjali Swami, and I represent a group of like-minded, amazing champions in the Coalition for Capital Equity. I have also been a women technologist and in both venture and private equity, as well as a female entrepreneur of color. So I can really speak to all sides of the experience. However, I am required to provide the following statutory disclaimer. My work on this panel is in no way part of my responsibilities at the Massachusetts State Senate and in no way represent the views or positions of the Massachusetts State House. And now that we've got the disclosure out of the way, let me kick this off with a question. My first question is actually to Rep. Nguyen. Can you just give us an overview of this fair investment legislation and what we're trying to do with capital equity in Massachusetts?
Thank you so much, Geeta, and good morning to everyone. As introduced, I'm State Representative Trom Nguyen, and just to clarify, I represent Andover, Boxford, North Andover, and Tewksbury, not Bedford, very south from here. I'm excited to be on this esteemed panel to talk about this bill that I filed in the House alongside with Senator Cindy Friedman, who filed this in the Senate. To give you the bill number, just so you can help us with advocacy later, it's House Bill 1708 and Senate Bill 978, an act relative to fair investment practices. And we here in Massachusetts pride ourselves on supporting small businesses and entrepreneurs to start and grow their businesses and thrive in our communities. They're so vital to our economic engine and job creation. And many people need the help of private investments like venture capital to bring their ideas to life. You might picture something like a Shark Tank, where people who are desperate for an investment and cannot afford to take on debt pitch their ideas in hopes of securing funding. But sadly, many of you have probably heard of the numbers. In 2022, women in Massachusetts, who make up 51% of the population, only received 0.9% of the venture capital funding, less than 1%. And nationally, in 2022, minorities only received 0.05% of funds. These numbers are just horrendous. They're beyond depressing, to be honest, and they illuminate the lack of equitable access to capital for women and minorities. And so our bill seeks to address this by establishing legal protections against sexual harassment and gender or race-based discrimination in capital investing. So right now, private investors can get away with sexual harassment and discrimination. So you heard that right. Private investors are not subject to federal or state sexual harassment or discrimination laws, the kinds of laws that exist in the spheres of employment relations and debt capital, which is protected through the federal fair lending laws. So while it's illegal for a venture capitalist to harass or discriminate against their employees, the same cannot be said for clients or potential clients. And so this leads to a hostile environment and toxic culture that encourages misconduct and discourages women, people of color, and others from marginalized communities from soliciting investments due to this harassment or potential harassment and intimidation. And so our bill would extend workplace sexual harassment and gender discrimination protections to venture capital and equity investor relationships beyond the traditional employer-employee, landlord-tenant relationships or any other forms of investments, such as lending where protections already exist. And it would also make it unlawful for investment professionals to abuse their power through sexual harassment. And so by closing these gaps at the state level, we would empower women and people of color and other vulnerable populations or marginalized populations to go after bad actors who abuse their investor power and put an end to toxic behavior and investment practices.
Thank you so much, Rep. Nguyen. And so this is really a wonderful, important background for everybody so we understand what the bill is about. But let me turn to the entrepreneur here and ask Allison. Allison, why is this necessary? Like, yes, we heard the statistics, etc., but can you tell us about what you're seeing on the ground that makes this real? What is it that you're experiencing and you and other entrepreneurs? And perhaps you can talk to what led you to take that leadership role in the California bill.
Sure. And yeah, the data, I frequently cite a lot of that data, and that is what powers the need for action here on the legislative side. Is there is no other resource in our country or in the world that has this level of inequity. When you think about that statistic in our state, in Massachusetts, that is 99% of venture capital dollars going to men in a state where we allocate the third highest amount of venture in the country. And in fact, there are many venture funds that it won't invest in entrepreneurs in Massachusetts because we are so prominent in venture, not even understanding that for women and people of color, we don't receive any of those funds. And it spans industries. We pride ourselves on biotech. This happens in biotech, right? Only 99% of those dollars are going to men, even in the life sciences and even with those graduates of Harvard and MIT that we have here.
Well, I want to point out that the woman who invented the mRNA vaccine couldn't get funded, right?
Yeah.
And that sort of illustrates it. I mean, we're talking about some stellar women who just fundamentally cannot access it. And we're losing all those amazing innovations.
Yes, exactly. As Representative Gwen said, this is the backbone of our economy, is funding innovation, and we are prohibiting all of this innovation, all of this monetary growth, all of these things, right? And I could go down a whole rabbit hole. It's, you know, why femtech is so far behind male healthcare. It's the same reason. But in any case, in terms of some real world examples, so what does this look like in practice? It spans everything from gross harassment, which is clearly occurring, and I hear about it all the time, to more subtle effects that still have devastating impacts on companies. And just so everyone knows, what my current company, Scroobius, I'm also a startup founder. I founded it 3 years ago, so I'm a female founder myself, fairly new in, and I manage a community of over 600 entrepreneurs, the majority of whom identify as underrepresented. So I can speak for me and for my community. But there are a few things that kind of happen in practice. An enormous one is the tone of the meeting and the language and the types of questions that are being asked. There's some really wonderful research from multiple institutions. I often point people to Donna Kanzi's TED Talk on prevention versus promotion questions. And I got this very heavily at my first startup when I didn't know any of these statistics. I didn't know what I was up against. It's why I started my current company, is I was constantly being asked to defend our business. Even though I raised 10 million for that company, we were revenue positive, we cleared FDA, we were a medical device, we had all the things, we were out of MIT. And I really struggled. We went to early acquisition because we couldn't raise our Series B. And now I know I was asked so many questions that put me on the defense about how are we going to protect ourselves, and why wouldn't this happen, and why wouldn't that happen? And there is a direct link between prevention questions and lack of funding. You lose funding for every prevention question you're asked, and women are overwhelmingly asked more prevention questions than men, who are asked promotion questions. So the whole tone of their meetings are, how big could this get? And really forward looking, and it directly correlates to dollars. So that's one that is a huge impact. It's not as overt as harassment, which, trust me, does happen, and I hear about it. I get calls from founders crying about actual harassment, but it has a devastating effect. Same with terms, right? I'm called young lady all of the time. I'm in my 40s. I have 2 kids. I am a peer with most of the people I talk to. Why am I young lady? And that type of language, again, sets the tone, and it correlates to dollars lost.
I want to point out that it actually gets much worse in some ways. I can tell you my personal experience, and I know a lot of women entrepreneurs who went through this, is we pitched to a bunch of VCs. They loved it. They loved it so much that even though we were ahead of the market, we had the product, we had the patents, we were way more experienced, they decided to incubate 2 young gentlemen who had just dropped out of Harvard to do the exact same thing, to the tune of hundreds of millions of dollars. So it gets far worse. It isn't just that they're discouraging you. It's that they are actively, whenever you have a good idea, taking it and subverting you, right? And I've heard the story from multiple women. Exactly. So I want to turn this over, right? Just because you made this so real with the examples and given such wonderful background, I want to turn this over to the 2 investors. And again, you guys are amazing, but I want to turn this over to Karen and Rajiv. You're both on the other side of the fence. What's the logic of the industry? It's not as if, I'd like to see a VC who would openly admit that they want to sexually harass women or it's a business advantage. And frankly, I think that giving money to this highly underrepresented, undercapitalized group, and which, by the way, incidentally, Citibank and Morgan Stanley say is a $2 trillion investing blind spot. That's $2 trillion we're not putting in. when we actually fund them, we'll basically double the industry. So who doesn't want to double the innovation economy? So I'd like to understand the logic. What's the thinking here? And can you speak to some of your personal experiences and viewpoints on this? So Karen, you want to go first?
I can. I think that being a woman-led fund, we have our own challenges in terms of raising capital so that we can look at funding entrepreneurs who are in underrepresented communities. I can't get inside the head of colleagues of mine who actually pride themselves on sexually harassing women entrepreneurs. It doesn't make sense. It's not a good business move. And you're absolutely right that no one would want to have that reputation. There are bad apples in the industry. There are bad apples in every industry. I've been in law, I've been in science, and those are both male-dominated communities as well. But this is a very much an old boys network and always has been, even for women in VC and private equity. I think that part of me wants to believe that they just aren't educated and don't understand what Allison just pointed out and how they're phrasing their questions, that they're not necessarily acting in that way. And there are certainly a lot of younger men coming up into the ranks that we hope will be a little more sensitive to that. But for our experience at Blue Highway, we raise a fund. We're raising another fund at the moment. And it is very difficult. It's very difficult. We're talking to a lot of organizations, mostly banks and foundations, and many of them are managed. Those funds are managed by men. And we either don't get a meeting, or in one instance, my experience I thought was funny. They said, don't you have a male partner? It actually happens to be we're women. There's two of us. We actually did have a male partner in the very beginning of this fund. They said, when you bring him back, and then we'll talk business. But otherwise, they were just looking at us as a couple of, quote, pretty faces with an interesting idea. And we just said, when we left that meeting, we said, we wouldn't care if they gave us the whole fund. We would not go back and minimize ourselves by actually even making any comment to that. But that's shame on us, right? Because then you don't follow up, right? So part of that in our side of the industry as the investors, because we wear the same hat when we're raising a fund that an entrepreneur does when they're trying to raise private capital from.
So let me just ask you, so this is really interesting. You're saying it isn't just the women entrepreneurs, but it's the women investors. And by the way, you are an entrepreneur too. You're just an entrepreneur in the capital business, and you're facing the same problem too, which is very interesting because this money, and I want to actually connect this to one point here and then come back to Rajiv in a minute. But this is originally public money, right? A lot of it is coming from public pension funds and public endowments and things like that. So Rep. Nguyen, can you speak a little bit about why is this critical to being a good steward of public money? Because that's where all the money is originally coming from.
Absolutely. I think that it's so important for us to talk about, as you said, the majority of this funding provided through private investments are public money. And so we need to ensure that this money is not being used to the detriment of a key goal of whether it's a commonwealth or otherwise, which is one of our goals is to advance diversity, equity, and inclusion. And we want public funds to be utilized in a way that improves rather than hinders women's and minorities' ability to access capital. At the same time, by supporting women-owned and minority-owned businesses and entrepreneurs, we will strengthen our state's economic growth and lead to make more more jobs being created in our Commonwealth. And as you probably have heard, the governor has said over and over and over, we want to make our state more competitive. We want to bring people here. So this bill would allow us to do that. And this is exactly why I'm so excited to be working with you all to advance this.
Thank you, Rep. Nguyen. So I want to go back to that question that we just asked, the investor perspective, and turn it over to Rajiv. And Rajiv, can you talk about what you have seen? And I'd love to hear your lens as both a man and as a father of 3 young women about why you think this is important and what is the kind of pushback you've got from the industry.
Awesome. Yes. First of all, thank you so much for having me, and totally agree with. So glad we can make some change with some laws in addition to everything else that we're trying to do. And third, I want to say the egregious stuff is definitely happening. I do hear about it. And I just want to say, yes, I hear it from many. But more on the innocent side, one of the things we pride ourselves on at our firm is being focused on the entire female ecosystem. So just to be clear, yes, we're investing in female-founded companies, and on the other side, doing our best to support women who are in venture capital, who might be all the way down from college to they're at another firm, they're at the mid-level. And one of the things I'm noticing there is that 15% of partners at funds are female, 1-5. I think that might overstate the amount of capital being deployed by female partners as well. And if you look at a little bit of that side of the ecosystem, just like having contact into those women at other funds and seeing how difficult it can be to get a first deal over the line. There's one of the VCs in our group has been at a fund a year, has had trouble getting a first deal over the line. And then a lot of times it's like a principal level, which is right below partner. And then maybe there's 5 male partners. So just like navigating promotion, other things. And so going back to what Allison was saying about the mindset in a meeting, I think this all feeds in, because if you don't have those female partners or they're not able to influence the funds, and a lot of this has been built up over time. So first of all, if they can't influence the funds, you're going to get a different mindset at the table. And second of all, it's very entrenched and a lot of inertia, because there's for example, a VC friend of mine who said she's bringing a female-founded deal into her firm, and then but the partners are going to want to go on the board, as opposed to me. I have the relationship right now, but it's going to flip over because I'm a principal. And we discussed some ideas for that, but that's because there could be a legal reason why the fund wants the partner to have that visibility and access, but also it's about compensation and power, and that partner gets paid to be on that board.
No, it's funny you bring up this whole angle here, because I'm thinking back to the time I was at Carlyle and I was on the investing side, and the partnership would keep sending female founder deals, and I just wanted to prove my street cred. And the biggest problem you have is you invest in the deal and you can't get follow-on financing for it. So you end up, as Allison points out, doing a fire sale, and then that sort of speaks to your track record. So there's such a huge disincentive even for women to invest in other women, because we're looking at the long-term success and we're saying the ecosystem doesn't support it because there isn't the follow-on capital, right? And by the way, there are some great inventions out there. As I said, what could be more world-changing than the mRNA vaccine? And yet we wouldn't fund her, right? I actually want to take a step back and bring Rangita into the conversation here, Professor Alvis. Can you talk about the broader human rights percolation effects? Because this is really about economic empowerment. And this is actually a pivot point for actually affecting a whole bunch of issues around gender and racial equity. So can you speak a little bit about this and why this is the pivot issue, which could change a lot of other things?
Thank you, Geeta. I cannot agree more with you that this is at the intersection of the economy and human rights. And to me, there is nothing more important than locating this powerful conversation and the Fair Investment Act within the broader global human rights agenda. This year, we celebrate the 75th anniversary of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights that was drafted by the architect who we look up to as the foremost American feminist, Eleanor Roosevelt. And in those rights, she enshrined the fact that these rights are inalienable and universal. And one of the most important provisions in the preamble to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights speaks to the dignity and the worth of the human person and the equal rights of men and women to determine and promote social and economic progress in our nation. So this is at the very heart of this conversation and at the very heart of the fair investment law. So I also want to look at the ways in which this conversation takes place leading up to the major Sustainable Development Goals Summit that is to take place next week in New York at the cusp of the UN General Assembly 78th session. And it will mark the beginning of a new phase of accelerating progress and the acceleration of progress to the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals depends on this conversation, depends on this law, State Representative Nguyen, that you have introduced. The right of women to fair and just access to economic resources. So,
thank you, Rangita. Let me ask Rep. Nguyen this question to make it real, because she was a human rights attorney. Rep. Nguyen, they say that economic empowerment actually reduces other forms of gender issues and racial issues like domestic violence, etc. Can you talk about this connectivity? Because it's really something that transforms the society and economy in more ways than just the money.
Absolutely. I agree. The investor power abuse, especially the predatory and discriminatory behavior that women entrepreneurs face, is very much similar to other forms of abuse. It's actually very much related to another bill that I filed that addresses coercive control, which I'm sure many of you have heard. It's a way of making people feel powerless and dependent on their abuser, whether that's dependence on the abuser to stay in this country, to stay in their home, or even false dependence. But the issue here is the imbalance in power, right? And the ability for people to feel to feel as though they don't have any independence to make the decisions. And so when women and minorities have better access to capital investments, then they're in a better position to fight back against harassment and abuse, because that is independence that they've gained. And so by pushing back against abusive behavior in one context, we help to address it in many other ways. We are empowering the person in a vulnerable situation to hold their abuser accountable. And by changing our laws, we will send a clear message that abuse of any kind will not be tolerated in the Commonwealth. We can accomplish this with your advocacy. So we need your help to push these bills, these very much related bills, forward. And so I'm really excited to be working with you all. This bill right now is in front of the Judiciary Committee, which is also hearing several of my other bills related to domestic violence. We want to paint, we want you to share these stories. We want to hear from you about how this empowerment will make such great changes, whether that's in the economic sense, the domestic violence change sense, or just in terms of empowering families overall.
Thank you, Rep. Yeah, let me just connect it and I'll get back to you, Rangita. Just bear with me here. So what you're saying, Rep. Nguyen, is that Harvey Weinstein telling, as a producer, which is an investor, telling a starlet, sleep with me and I will fund your company, your movie, is actually in some ways very analogous to a domestic abuser that withholds economic access, right? They're the same kind of mindset, and we just mentally have it in different buckets where we're saying this is a business transaction. It isn't. It's about coercive control, correct? You were making a point. Please go ahead.
I want to build on what the representative just said, that economic disempowerment is a structural cause of violence against women. And so this bill really looks at those structural systemic causes of violence and human insecurity that women experience, especially underrepresented women. And to your point, Representative, about this is all about inequality of power, that when President Biden reauthorized the Violence Against Women Act in 2022, he in fact stated very clearly that the act is about challenging the abuse of power, that both the Violence Against Women Act that he introduced in 2000 as well as the 2022 is about challenging the abuse of power, and that this is how we need to locate this bill as one that is at the center of challenging the abuse of power. We also have to center it within the National Strategy on Gender Equity and Equality that was introduced by the Biden-Harris administration in order to build back better just in the aftermath of the pandemic. And it is important for us to examine this within that framework, that economic inequality, economic inequity, especially in terms of gender equity and gender equality, hinders the country's and the world's capacity to build back better. So this bill is really about being part of a global public reckoning of the role that women can play in the global GDP.
Thank you so much, Rangita. So it's really an economic development bill, even though we're not calling it, which comes back to the point I was making earlier. We're going to double the innovation economy. Who doesn't want to double the innovation economy? So actually, in that, I think I want to turn around and say, but there is an amazing amount of backlash here. And so I want to talk to first Rajiv and then Karen and Allison, who are facing, and Allison will speak to the kind of backlash and pushback that she's faced from the industry on California Bill 54. And perhaps Karen and Rajiv can address, why is the industry so concerned about this? So how about we start with Allison and then we can go to Karen and Rajiv. Go ahead, Allison.
Sure. Yeah, it's very disheartening and concerning where the opposition is coming from. And I know in California and in Massachusetts, the primary opponents are the venture capital industry in different organizations. And I can tell you in California, we passed through all 7 committees. We have passed the House, we have passed the Senate. It is now off for signature. And it is now at the very last second, and this was strategic, that we received opposition from the venture capital industry, and a very strong opposition. So it is fully now on the governor to decide what to do, whether to sign this bill into law and do the right thing here and go with the voice of the public and with his legislature, or to listen to these private opposition interests that came up at the last second. And I can't...
What's their logic? What is the rationale they're making? What is the case they're making here?
Yeah, I can't speak obviously on behalf of them or for them, but there has been opposition to any type of regulation that has to deal with private capital, right? And so when you think of venture capital or private equity, it's all about somebody being able to steward or decide what you do with someone else's private money. But there are multiple issues here. Of course, it isn't just private money, as you said. There's pensions and endowments and LPs, limited partners, that have the capital in these funds that don't even know that this is how it's being distributed and wouldn't agree with how it's being distributed. And of course, there's all the issues that you were all just speaking about in terms of this being a real concern in the power balance. And I can share from the entrepreneur perspective, there is a huge element of fear because you have serious retributions if you speak up. And I have done that myself. I'm now in a position where I do speak up every single time, and I have been penalized for it. And without knowing that your government is there to protect you, that element of fear is overwhelming most of the time. And so that those two issues really do bring this into, yes, there should be bills, there should be regulation. This is we need our government here. But the private industry, as soon as you have one bill, because there aren't any right now, you open the door for others, and they lose control and they lose some power. So the opposition we're hearing are criticizing the way that we're collecting data. And there's a lot of speak about how they are already doing data collection efforts as a private institution. These are venture capital institutions, right? So it's essentially like a pharmaceutical company saying, you don't need a third party to oversee or verify this data. We already ran a study, so just use our data.
Right. In fact, what you're saying is it's anybody trying to regulate the industry. That's the objection. It's not, there is no basis in terms of they really want to sexually harass women. And there's a logic to the madness. Because I did read that the industry was suing the SEC for disclosure requirements. And so that's yet another example of how they don't want anyone to regulate them. Karen, Rajiv, I know you've got a tough job here, but can you explain what's the industry's logic beyond they don't want to be accountable to anyone?
And I think that is a part of it. Yes, the whole SEC regulations that are coming online, which maybe one would argue the SEC is overstepping its authority. I think that's part of it. I think on the other hand, there's something called an institutional limited partner association. And there's a questionnaire that we as investors in a fund have to complete as part of diligence for limited partners to invest in our fund in particular. And this particular go around, there is extensive questions about not only ESG and your investing strategy around ESG, it's really about DEI and that investing strategy, which did not come up until this last go around 2 years ago. They have invested heavily. Although there may be opposition, there's a lot of LPs are looking for information as well. Public pension funds there's always been a pushback and a fight, especially in California. Funds that took in public pension money, the public pension funds wanted to report on performance of those funds, and those funds have repeatedly tried to find ways or to really discourage, showing their performance aside from what they're doing to agree or disagree as to who they fund. So that's been going on for forever, as long as I've been in this industry a long time. So I think it's generally the pushback. I think it's a question about how you're looking over their shoulder. And that's not, again, it is a private fund, although public funds are part of it in some cases, not every case. We don't have any public funds in our fund, for instance, so we don't have public pension funds, endowments. But that, I think, is a general issue. I think the other piece of this is just thinking about how to, again, the DEI piece, I think, is really bringing this forward. And so we are going to be, meaning including our fund, we are being asked to report and pay specific attention to this. And there's a study that I found, which I can talk about at another point. I want Raji to get some thoughts in.
Right. So fantastic. So I actually want to ask Rajiv a slightly different question, right? We're talking about a lot of the negative issues here, the backlash and the pushback and all that, but there are success stories, right? For entrepreneurs and investors. There are things that give us hope that it is possible to have that positive change. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I have two quick thoughts on the positive side. So one is from the founder side. One of the things I was surprised to find is that, and I'm thinking of one or two founders in particular that raised a really small amount early on, incredibly small check size. And then I was talking to them a year later about it. And I said, that person invested that really small amount. Sorry, it couldn't have been bigger or whatever. And then this person turned around and said to me, these founders turned around and said, listen, that was the first yes we got. It gave us the confidence to go raise our round of 1.5 million or whatever that number was. So that was a shocking example of how just a small allyship can make a big difference. And then the second thing on the venture capital side, the example I give is this woman she's at a multi-$100 million climate fund out of London. She got promoted to partner while we were friends, and we were discussing it, celebrating it on a call. It turned into an hour call of like how she almost didn't get there. And she has a husband who's an entrepreneur and a young child, and she's almost downgraded her career because she thought it might be too much. And her husband said, no, you're doing this. And then, so I just wanted to put that example out there.
Fantastic. So there are sparks of hope, but you just need the bill to create a fire, right? There are sparks all over the place. So in terms of a strategy, I think we've had a very interesting discussion about what we're seeing as the trends, why this is important, etc. But we have not come up with a strategy for dealing with the backlash. So how do we counter the backlash and create a effective narrative around this bill and the positive parts of it, because it is about economic development? I want Rangita to start with this discussion and then perhaps move to Rep. Nguyen and Karen about that.
Thank you, Dr. Swami. So I want to start by building on something that Alison and Karen have both mentioned, because that brings me to the fundamental issue of we really need to redefine the concept of sexual harassment. We are using that terminology in a way that doesn't really address the very root causes of harassment, which is gender-based harassment. This has got very little to do with sexual harassment, but everything to do with gender-based harassment. The examples and the stories that Alison and Karen have shared with us go to that very point. Being called young lady, it's really not sexual in its context and composition, but it's gender-based harassment. The way in which the All Boys Network seems to erase you, Karen, from the public sphere in terms of the way in which men are asked questions about promotion and women are being asked questions about prevention. This has got everything to do with gender-based harassment. So I would like us to redefine this as gender-based harassment and not only as sexual harassment. This is far broader than that. And then as to what are the strategies, there are the legal strategies, but as legal strategies are constitutive, but they're not sufficient. And we need to think of legal strategies as only one path to addressing and combating this more structural issue. And Rajiv, you spoke about the role of allyship. And that is very important, that the role that men have to seize in terms of addressing this. But in terms of allyship, we need to go beyond passive allyship and performative allyship to real, what I have called upstander allyship. It is not enough to be a bystander and say, I'm not part of the problem. No, if you're a real ally, you're going to stand up against injustice. You're going to stand up and speak up and act on justice and fairness. So I would like to see these laws being complemented by a real institutional and systemic commitment to the role of allies in addressing gender-based harassment in venture.
We need more. So in Harvard lingo, we need more man ambassadors, right? Like Rajiv. So this is a good point to ask Rep. Nguyen this question. Rep. Nguyen, how are we going to make this bill a reality in Massachusetts? What do you visualize? How are we going to be effective, and how can we support you in this?
Thank you so much for the question. This is such a great start for us to even lay out the groundwork here so that people understand what the issue is. And I think that is one of the biggest problems, that people don't even recognize that this is a problem. And so we need more people like you and others to tell these stories, to talk about how this bill would impact the industry and impact economic development. And the other important thing for us to do is we should have conversations with those who oppose us, because to your point, Geeta, earlier about who would oppose us, who wants to advance sexual harassment? And so we need to find those common grounds. What are their goals, and how can we work with them to advance this together? Because I can only see this as a win. If we can get this bill passed, we can get more investors, we can address many of the issues in this industry. And so I'm a big believer in talking with folks on the other side to find a path forward. And so, and we will want to rely on experts like you to give us these numbers so that when we go into these hearings, when we have these conversations with the committee or others in the legislature, that we provide them with a clear picture of how this could not only impact this industry particularly, but as we have talked about throughout this discussion, is how this will impact so many other sectors and areas throughout the Commonwealth, and advance so many of the goals that we have as a state.
Fantastic. Thank you. In fact, actually, I'm glad you brought that point up, because I remember one of the reasons why I became an entrepreneur was not because I was a natural entrepreneur, but was because I had a small child. And entrepreneurship gave me the flexibility to be a mother. So believe it or not, if we fund women entrepreneurs, we actually start solving the childcare problem too. Mm-hmm. And so we're affecting multiple aspects of it. So we are actually sort of hitting time. So I want to sort of turn around to the panel and have each of you give me a one-sentence takeaway from this discussion, which has been amazing and really rich. But unfortunately, all good things have to end. So why don't we just go around the room? Let me start with Karen. What's your one-sentence takeaway?
One sentence. Well, I think the Fair Investment Act just needs to be just that, fair. The intended result here is for women and other underrepresented minorities to be able to access capital, to be able to grow those companies and hold the bad actors accountable.
Fantastic. Rajiv?
My single comment would be to men out there, think about access for women, whether it's about getting them on a board, funding their company, or a position at a VC fund. There's so many ways, or just being a mentor. That's it.
Thank you. Alison?
Okay, it's a little more than one sentence, but I'll make it quick. So this has been my first time involved in legislation with the California bill, and it has been really eye-opening. So I really want everybody listening who's here or listening later to know how I thought about this as a parallel. For all of you entrepreneurs, introducing a new bill is like introducing a new feature, right? You're bringing something new that should be based on what your customers need. That's how you get it through management so that it can be built. Well, a bill needs the same. We are the customers. They actually need our voices. The legislature, our management that decides if this bill gets through, if this feature gets made, our voices matter, and our legislators are accessible, and they need to hear from us. So my takeaway is follow through. If you want this bill to get passed, showing up today is not enough. Look at the follow through, sign letters, make your voices heard, because the number of voices is what will get the bills through. So that's my takeaway.
Thank you, Allison. I love that analogy of management and customers. Ragita?
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Swami. So in 2019, just before the global pandemic, the International Labour Organizations, the world's largest multilateral on the safety and protection and the promotion of international labor, introduced ILO 190, the Convention 190 on violence and harassment, that focuses on the rights of women. And at the heart of this convention is the value system that nothing is as important to the global economy as the human and economic security of women. So I see this bill on fair investment law as being part of that global agenda, ILO 190, that nothing is as important to the global economy as the human and economic security of women.
Thank you, Ragita. And last but not least, Rep. Nguyen, your one sentence takeaway.
Yes, I want to make sure that we send that clear message that abuse of any kind not tolerated here in the Commonwealth. And I want to follow up on Allison's point about making your voices heard. We continue to talk about expertise and all this data. I want to reiterate that when you reach out to the legislature, we want to hear stories. We want to hear about how this impacts you personally. You do not need to be an expert. You do not need to be someone who's been involved in the legislature or legislation for a long time. We want to encourage new people who haven't been involved to please get involved now with this bill and talk about how this would really benefit you in XYZ way. And we look forward to continue to update you on when we'll have a hearing for this bill. And we hope that you will show up in great numbers, because just to give you a perspective, there are over 7,000 bills filed in the Massachusetts legislature every session. So we need you to help elevate this bill above the others so that we can move this forward. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, everybody. This is one of the most wonderful dynamic discussions that I have had the privilege of being part of. And so please express my gratitude and the audience's gratitude. Before we kind of segue to audience questions, I want to kind of put up the call to action, which a lot of you have articulated, but I want to make this really easy so that we've simplified it and done a lot of the pre-work so you can take action. So I am going to go ahead and put up some slides and just go over this. First call to action. If you just have 30 seconds and you want to help, you please sign the petition showing your support. We have a joint petition which we are going to be providing as part of the hearings. So go ahead and sign, either as an organization or as an individual, but get your voice there. And we made it really easy. You can go to that link there, or you can just take out your cell phone. I would do it right now, camera, and scan the QR code on the screen. And that will take you to the link. So what I'm going to suggest is scan the codes, note the website so you can go back to it later on. We will send these out, but I always make it easy for people to pay attention. So I'll give you a minute to go ahead and scan it. In fact, I will go ahead and scan it so that I know that it's going to take a minute. Okay, I've scanned it, so this works for me. Next slide. Okay, if you have a little more time, you've got, say, 5 minutes, and 5 minutes is not a lot, go ahead and leave a quote about why this legislation is important to you. talk about your experiences with access to capital and fundraising. We need to hear from you. Kind of getting back to the point that Rep. Nguyen was making, it is about making your voice heard. So please go ahead and do that. So once again, you can either go to that link, or you can take out your camera and scan that QR code, and it should take you to a survey which allows you to leave a quote about your experience. And I've scanned it, so I know that was enough time. Next one. Okay, if you've got a little more time, say 15 minutes, we want you to reach out to your senator or your rep. You can call them, or you can send them an email. And in order to find out who your rep or senator is, just go to the Massachusetts legislature website and look for it based on address. You should have no problem. If you want to send them an email, we've provided an email template for you, which you can cut and paste from and use as you wish. So once again, go ahead, scan the QR code, which will take you to the templates, and you should be able to access it very easily. Great. Next one. And if you've got just 30 seconds more, go ahead and sign up for the newsletter. We send regular updates with news, action items, calls to events, information. So if you want to be part of the community and get updates, go ahead and sign up for the newsletter. And once again, easy way to do it, just go ahead, scan the QR code, and that should take you into the place to register to sign up for the regular emailer. And I just did that, so I know that's how much time it took. And finally, we have started doing monthly walkthroughs. Actually, it's bi-monthly, Thursdays and Mondays in September and October, where we can just walk through. We usually do it either a Monday or a Thursday between 2 and 4. And the reason that's a good day is most senators and reps are in the State House on those days. And it's just informal. It's a chance to go and talk to your senator, rep, and members of the Judiciary Committee, and just to let them know that this is important, and to ask them to support the bill, co-sponsor the bill, and remind them that it's important to you, the constituent. And we've come up with an easy system for you to sign up for particular dates, so we can coordinate and make sure there are more people with you. So once again, go ahead, scan the QR code. It should take you to a form which allows you to choose which day you want to attend, or whether you want to go on your own, and just helps you engage with the rest of the community in the walkthroughs. And I scanned it, so I know this works. So come and visit the State House, getting back to Rep. Nguyen's point. And finally, last one, if you want to learn more, you can read the bill, and that's up on the State House website, or, and actually, you can go ahead and review the fact sheet. So if you scan the QR code, once again, that should take you to the fact sheet, which gives you a brief summary of the bill and the rationales and reasons, as well as links to different articles on the same subject. So we really hope you will go ahead and take action, because it is really your action which will determine the success of this initiative. Thank you very much. I want to thank all the amazing panelists, Rangita, Nguyen, Karen, Allison, Rajiv. Thank you very much. You guys were amazing. We will be sending out a follow-up email to everyone who attended, and we will be putting the recording up for anyone who wasn't able to attend. But thank you for coming, and thank you for being part of this.